Wild type salmon?
It's lunchtime at the San Francisco headquarters of Wild Type, and company founders Justin Kolbeck and Aria Elfenbein believe that what's on the menu is nothing short of the future of seafood. Thin slices of salmon, not caught in the open ocean or even farmed in captivity, but instead grown in their lab.
For me, it was the sort of confluence of, okay, there's this potential technology that could address this really big problem that our society is facing. Very simply, where are we going to get enough meat and seafood for the next 3 billion people?
The samples are sliced from the cutting edge of an emerging technology known as cell-cultured seafood. And for the Wild Type founders, it's part of a larger mission. Kolbeck traces it back to his former career in the Foreign Service and stops like war-torn Afghanistan, where he remembers speaking with fathers who snuck miles across the border into Pakistan to bring back food for their families.
It's those kind of stories that really stick with you. And, you know, like, as a dad, of course I would do the same thing to, like, feed my kids.
Essentially, we have the cells that come out of the bioreactor.
We toured their lab, which, in its own classic startup story, was converted from a microbrewery. Now, expanded from beer tanks to bioreactors, it helps grow the living cells derived from Pacific salmon.
So this is our seed lab.
Co-founder Aria Elfenbein says the process ultimately nurtures the cells into a form of biological salmon tissue that's mixed with plant-based ingredients. To appreciate just how complex that science is, you might want to journey a few blocks away to Elfenbein's former life as a researcher at San Francisco's Gladstone Institutes. That's where Nobel Prize-winning scientists engineer breakthroughs, like turning lab-created stem cells into beating heart cells. President Deepak Srivastava remembers the day Elfenbein came into his office to let him know he was leaving, to turn similar techniques into lab-grown salmon.
And sitting down and saying, Deepak, I'm really grateful for the training I've gotten here, but I've always been passionate about sustainable food for the planet.
He said, you know, I really feel that this is something that you care about. And these kinds of decisions, like I can already feel, is something that you have a lot of conviction around.
But that career-changing decision also came at a revolutionary time for the Earth's food supply, with Bay Area companies like Savor Foods introducing butter cultivated from CO2, and Berkeley's Upside Foods pioneering lab-grown meats and chicken. Still, Wild Type admits the next part of the journey could be convincing consumers to try lab-based seafood. To get started, the company has staged dinners, tastings, and partnerships with chefs.
And actually what ended up happening was it wasn't a big deal. You know, the staff kind of introduced it as a third option beyond wild-caught and farm-raised. And a lot of people ordered it. In fact, we sold all of the fish that we had that first night.
So we're here we have our Wild Type salmon lox.
In the end, besides the taste, the long-term mission is sustainability, availability, and price. To create seafood that's affordable for everyone and a global solution that's far easier on our planet.
I think that's a future that feels like a far happier future. We're able to sustain the new humans who will be residing on this planet.
And that's really our vision, is to have the most accessible, clean salmon on the planet.
Really remarkable work they're doing. And Wild Type Salmon will make its Bay Area debut next week on the 14th on the menu of the sushi restaurant Robin in San Francisco.
There is new information coming out about just all this lab-grown stuff. So you got lab-grown tuna, which I just found out about, but you also have lab-grown salmon. Okay, so it's like they take the cells of like actual live salmons and they essentially cook it up in a lab. Okay, people said it tastes good, but this is where we're getting now with food, especially with American food as well. Okay, you have a lot of other places who are not adopting this kind of stuff. I believe it was a lot of southern states. But you had certain states that have been rejecting this because it's like, what is this? Okay. But we already know our food industry is not good anyways with the antibiotics and all the hormones they're adding in your stuff. And then now you got little girls having their periods at 9 years old. food because they've been drinking that milk when they were younger. You're also having all these other kind of adverse side effects. Girls are developing way earlier than they should be. So you're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff that's going on. I mean, just take a look at when I went to my hometown. I was seeing one because it's by a high school. I didn't get to go to the high school. I had to go to the high school that was much further because I was zoned, even though this one was 7 minutes walking. That one was 25 minutes. So, but whatever. But you go and see some stuff like this, for example, and it's like when you see these kids, a lot of them are big bags. So that's one. Okay. I'm a big bag too. So, but a lot of them are big backs, and when I was in school, I was not. But there's one and two. If you look at just developmental wise, the girls and the boys look much older than what they typically would. Now, of course, you have your one-offs. Like when I was in school, it was their one-offs, but there's a lot of them now, especially that look way older, more developed, and is like, what is going on? What are y'all eating? But when you go and see like what people are eating, look at all the red dyes, yellow dyes, blue dyes that is in everything. Look at your Takis. Look at your Minute Maid, those pink lemonades. Oh, I used to love those, red dye in them. You got some sausages that got red dye in them. Is red dye in so much stuff, and that can actually inhibit your developmental stage as well. You go and look at that. You look at all the added sugars that are in everything, high fructose corn syrups, all of this kind of stuff. All the hormones in the meats and the milk, and things just aren't as clean as they should be. Things want to be mass produced, so you got a chicken this freaking big when it should have been more like this size, but we got to make it this big and as quickly as possible so that we could go and chop the head up, take the feathers off, and then cut it up and send it to the butcher and all this other stuff. So it's like you see how our industry of food actually is. Okay, and then you look at agriculture as well, and okay, you got that Roundup that is still being sold up in Home Depots and Lowe's to this day. So you go and look at all this kind of stuff that's going on. And then now they're attacking your meat. Okay. I mean, they already were, but now they're like, oh, well, let's do plant-based. And then you go and look at plant-based. Like I used to eat Morningstar, like those breakfast patties. And then one day I looked, I said, well, let me go and take a look at the ingredients. I'm like, well, what is this? What's really in here, at this point. So it's like, now you go and look at something like that. And then it's like, okay, now people are like, oh, well, I still want to do the vegan, vegetarian, but I also kind of want to go and move over to something else. And then now we got lab grown meat, if you can even call it that. And it's like, what are you guys putting in it? This isn't natural. And they say, oh, but there's no mercury, or there's very little mercury in it. People been eating fish and seafood. Y'all, look at the Asian people, for example. You know how much seafood these people be eating. Okay, you don't hear anyone complain about mercury. So it's like, to me, I go and look at all this and I'm like, this is not natural. This is not something that people should be consuming, at the very least, because like, what is this kind of stuff? But they're trying to push this out as much as possible. For me, I say as long as you, hey, if that's what y'all want to put out there, but as long as you let the consumer know that this is lab grown and people can make a decision. I don't agree with it, but it's a starting point. Okay. Because what I don't like is when they go and say like, oh, well, do we really have to tell them though? Come on. That kind of like ruins the allure. No, you have to tell people that this is not real food. What are we even talking about here? Just like we have organic that is grown right next to stuff that's not organic with all the pesticides, and somehow the soil just at that moment just stops. It stops absorbing anything that you just put in next to it. And is it really organic or as organically sourced as some people may claim? Don't know. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of these videos that I have.
Lab-grown salmon has received FDA approval and is now available for sale across the United States. The company Wild Type is promoting this as sustainable, good for the environment and climate change. But is it good for you? Cultivated salmon, that's what it's called, is not found in the oceans or the streams, but it is grown in stainless steel tanks like you would find at a brewery. To make it as real as possible, they harvest salmon cells. But what other ingredients are used? Canola oil, sunflower seeds, soy, beta carotene, natural colors, and natural flavors. Why do I have a feeling that the colors and the flavors aren't natural? How does it look and feel like real salmon? Well, wild salmon develop muscles from swimming around in the water. But in this case, scientists have to engineer the texture using mechanical or biochemical cues to get the cells to align like real muscle fibers. Restaurants in California, Texas, Washington, and Oregon have this on their menus now. So when you go to a restaurant, you no longer have to ask if the salmon is wild caught or farm raised. You also want to ask if it's cultivated and grown in a lab. So my question to you is, are you going to eat lab-grown salmon? As always, I want to hear what you think about all of this down below.
You can now get cultivated salmon in any restaurant. It's been approved by the FDA. Yes, cultivated salmon. So not farm raised, not wild caught, cultivated. It's being made in the lab, you know, with the chicken and the printed beef. The FDA has approved cultivated salmon. And when the FDA says something's okay, they're saying it's okay for us to consume. Tell me when food that is being made in laboratories is okay for us to eat. Because you know now when you buy like the Pillsbury biscuits, look at the ingredients and the labels. It says bioengineered. What do you think that means? The thing that has me is we already know that the chicken's been made, the beef is printed, it's printed, and the FDA has now approved cultivated salmon. Now countries in Europe, countries like especially Italy, they're like, you're not making shit in a laboratory and feeding it. We're gonna have real food. The fact that European countries do not allow any of this nonsense, but the United States does, is pretty telling. So when you guys are all saying that moving abroad is not an option and America's the greatest place in the world, it used to be. But tell me how you feel about cultivated salmon being approved by the FDA. And also remember how that mayor in New York had said that in New York by 2030, allegedly, that they were going to put like a quota on how much meat New Yorkers can buy. Google it. And you know the guy who started Microsoft? You know the guy. You know the guy that goes to Africa and does stuff. You know who I'm talking about. He's funded this. He's funded this whole cultivating salmon in laboratories. He's funding it. And the FDA is like, yep, it's good to go. So again, I left the United States to move to France. And I come back and forth. And every time I come to the United States, I can't wait to leave. Because whenever I am going to eat food, I'm wondering what I'm actually eating. Tell me why we can't just continue to have cattle and pigs and like food. But remember in 2024, in the summertime, where all that cattle and all those ranches got set on fire, some freak weather situation? Yeah. And all that cattle was done away with. So are they purposely getting rid of our food supply so that they can force Americans to eat stuff that they're making in a laboratory? And apparently it's all good because the FDA said, yep, it's approved, cultivated salmon. I'm going to put a picture here with an article, and then you guys tell me how you feel about it, because this is pretty interesting. We're not going to talk about the floods and all the weird weather-related things. We're not going to talk about that because if you look at it big picture, like if you make yourself like a drone and you hover over this country, You would have to be like literally asleep to not see the shenanigans that are going on. And this is alleged. I'm going to put the article in for you to see that the FDA approved it. But let me know how you feel about eating food grown in a laboratory.
You can't spell immediately without media. And what's trending on social media for lunch today is the FDA approved lab-grown salmon for human consumption in the U.S. They'll feed us anything, won't they? Make sure y'all pronounce the hard L with this, salmon, because the L is for lab-grown. This isn't immediately, repeatedly, no. I don't do farm-raised. Wild caught is the best salmon to purchase, but even then you got to still check for worms and things like that or what have you, man. But lab-grown salmon.
So the plant-based ingredients we're using are commonly found in the food system today, right? They're kind of pre-approved, and so the actual FDA review process that we went through was for the quote unquote novel ingredient. Even though if you like DNA test our cells, what's going to come back is color salmon. Yeah, right. Uninteresting in that respect. But the way in which they were grown is new. And so we can make a product that is 0.001% salmon to 100% salmon. Right. And right now we're using a mix, like I was saying, of some plant-based ingredients and some and our cultivated cells, of course. And so as we change the plant-based backbone of the product, we don't have to go back to FDA and say, hey, can we swap out like canola for olive oil based on feedback we're getting from the market? They're kind of neutral about that.
How do you kind of think about this, hey, third option that removes the pollutants, removes the parasites, removes the antibiotics, removes the long-term challenges to the environment and others, but at the same time, it's new, it's different. There's no long-term studies, right? Like unless you all have 20, 30-year studies of consistently eating this type of manufactured food. How do you balance that from your perspective? You know, like, so for example, what kind of standards did you all need to meet to be able to get FDA approval? And do you think that that's enough to get people across the finish line?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think you're right that there's a lot of skepticism today about the food supply generally, right? And unfortunately, FDA has been pulled into that conversation. And look, part of the reason that we really took our time with that process is, you know, the FDA, their role in this was to work with us to figure out like what would a dossier safety statement include? Because when we first started having these conversations, it was, believe it or not, back in 2018, one of the first few companies to even come to them and say, hey, we're making this new product. What do you need to see from us? And so the first part was, what are all the components of what that safety dossier would include? Then once we got that submitted, it was years of back and forth, basically letting them ask any question that they could possibly think of. And the way that we handled testing, we sent all the tests out to independent third-party labs, which unfortunately ended up being kind of costly over a number of years, but it's important, right? And so we looked at every possible thing that we would be worried about, right? Like heavy metal comparison between our product and conventional fish, all of the pathogens that you would be worried about in food, right? Salmonella, Listeria, E. coli, all the way down to like botulism, like things that are really hard to imagine showing up in our product.
Fish stocks are declining, oceans are warming, planet's warming up, and there's been a lot of movement toward alternative proteins, right, across the board, as a way to create another choice, another solution, another option for consumers that might be a little bit easier on the planet.
Think about fish farms, for example. Typically, a fish will sort of swim around for a couple of years before it's harvested. In our case, it's on the order of weeks, and so 6 to 8 weeks typically for some of the cuts that we make.
The texture is so close. You know, the firmness of the fish, the color of the fish, the striations, the oiliness, and it has just this really great, clean finish, and you can taste that in the product. Even after tasting the more recent prototypes, I prefer this product over regular salmon, and it's just because for me, sometimes if you get fish that's just a few days old or maybe it's not super fresh, it does kind of have a fishy smell to it.
It's not on the market yet, certainly not in any large scale. And so what we're focused on right now is scale and bringing the cost down.
Today on the 5:30 show, I'm with our climate and environment producer, Tim Didion, who has some lab-grown salmon we're going to try. Yes, this was grown in a lab using salmon cells.
Salmon cells in a bioreactor that used to be a beer tank.
Oh, a bioreactor that used to be a beer tank. So yes, you're seeing that salmon right there, and we are going to taste it. Okay, I'm going to eat it and tell you what I think. Here we go. Cracker, cream cheese, the salmon, a little bit of onion, dill. It tastes just like the real thing. Same texture, smell, all of it. It's a little bit less greasy, but aside from that, I would not be able to tell the difference. So here you go. Lab-grown salmon. It's the way of the future.